Welcome to the Family Bible Journey. Every time you listen, you are a blessing and encouragement to us as we seek to leave the legacy of faith as we journey and journal through the Bible. So thanks for listening. This is episode 269, season 1 of the Family Bible Journey Old Testament podcast. Today we're looking at Esther chapter 2. The title of today's podcast is Beautiful in Every Way. And our key verses for today are chapter 2, verses 5 to 18, where we read, Now there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives carried away when Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is, Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Hegai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Hegai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. And he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. When the young woman went in to the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she would go in, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go in to the king again, unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast, and also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces, and gave gifts with royal generosity. This is the word of the Lord. In our previous Old Testament episode, it was the unfavorable behavior of Vashti in disrespecting her husband that frightened the old men, who were afraid that their wives would show them contempt and no longer cooperate with their husband's wishes. So it was the old men's wishes to have Vashti exiled and sent off away from the king as a punishment for this royal insult. And here in this chapter, it is the young men, we are told, who make the plan that the king agrees with. And their plan to find the king a new wife is a 5th century BC version of The Bachelor, where all of the most beautiful women of the king's capital city were summoned together, prepared for an entire year, beautified in every way, so that he then could choose the best of the best as his own wife. And Esther's appearance, we are told clearly in verse 7, is that she both had a beautiful figure and that she was lovely. And it was because of her physical appearance that she was chosen for the royal harem. But the beauty that landed her the king was not just her physical appearance, because we're told that when she went in to meet the king, she asked Hegai, that chief eunuch who was in charge of her and the other women, the only person maybe that she knew who had direct access to the king, she asked Haggai what to bring to win the king's favor. And in asking that question, she showed that her beauty was not only physical, but rather that she was a kind and virtuous woman who was winning the affections not only of the king, but everyone who knew her. And she was also wise and shrewd in this manner, both in listening to her uncle Mordecai and also listening to the man who had grown to appreciate and respect this young, lovely maiden. And I have some notes here on chapter 2 that I want to share with those who are journaling with us through the Bible. The first is on verse 9, where Esther, we are told, won the favor of the eunuch. It says, Esther's inner beauty wins a friend in the chief eunuch. And then in verse 11, where we hear that Mordecai every day was standing out in the courts, outside of where the royal harem was being kept, just to hear what was going on with Esther. My note says, Mordecai devoted his life to this girl. And I have a words of wisdom there on that verse. It says, someone well loved knows how to love well. And I believe that Mordecai, raising this young girl as his own daughter, doting on her as a dearly loving father, made her the woman that she was. Because in my experience with people, it often takes being loved in order for someone to know how to love. And here, even though Mordecai was not her biological father, he shows himself as a dedicated and doting father, returning every day to see how things were going for his little girl. And then my note on verse 15, Esther wisely trusted the counsel of the only person she may have known who knew the king. She was a wise woman. And she, in this story, in so many ways, shows us how it is that we as God's people can seek to strive to do well, to impress others, not in a showy and flamboyant way that oftentimes the world would promote, but rather simply by being a person of virtue and integrity and wisdom and beauty. None of us has any say in what we look like physically, but every single one of us can cultivate those inner virtues that made Esther more beautiful than all of the rest. And at the tail end of chapter 2, we see that Mordecai, as he is waiting for news about Esther one day, learns of an assassination attempt on King Ahasuerus. And he informed Esther of this plot. Esther in turn informed the king. And when the king had the matter investigated, he found out that sure enough, 2 of his closest advisors were conspiring against him, and he had them executed. And that is where our chapter ends, with Esther firmly in her place as the queen who is now won over many friends in her court and now saved the life of the king thanks to the help of her uncle, her adopted father Mordecai. And so she is well positioned and doing very well by herself as a daughter of exiles, largely because of this inner beauty that she had cultivated, that had been cultivated in her by Mordecai, who raised this young woman to stand head and shoulders above the rest. A big thank you to all of you whose financial support makes this podcast work. As many of our listeners know, I receive zero compensation for this podcast. However, as the podcast has now grown to touch people in over 40 states and over 24 countries, it has become very helpful to have a trusty assistant in the form of a college intern to edit and produce the podcasts for us. So if you would like to see even more of the Family Bible Journey or podcasts like it, please go to the website, familybiblejourney.com, where you can make a tax-deductible contribution to our work and bless others as we share this journey of journaling through the Bible together. Our blessing for today. May you learn to love by being loved and cultivate the inner beauty of virtues that made Esther irresistible. Amen.